Hi everyone, my name's Martin. I'm a web development, full stack web developer as well as teacher. And this is the FEDSA mentoring program that runs Monday every 5 to 6 South African Standard Time. And we've now finally got a sponsor, which is Code Capsules. And I'll be dropping more details on that once I'm actually done with the session. So welcome everyone. This session we're going to be doing, we're going to be looking at JavaScript, probably a 2 or 3 part session just so that we can get like proper coverage. Okay, so let me just start sharing my screen and then we'll start off. Okay, so I know some of you aren't ready yet, completely yet to jump into JavaScript, but we do need to slowly start moving on, unfortunately. But the good thing is that you can always come back to these videos if you do find that you are still trucking along with HTML and CSS, you're not ready to start JavaScript, then at least you can watch this video at a later stage. Okay, so let's get going. All right, so what is JavaScript? Okay, so JavaScript is a programming language that was made in 1995 by Brendan. I don't know if I'm going to say his name here, Brendan Ike. I'm not going to go much into the history about it other than say that he actually built JavaScript in 10 days. Like that's all in 10 days he built JavaScript and that was it. It basically follows a standard called ECMA script, but I'm just going to sort of leave it at there. Other than you do get another language called Java, and that's not the same as JavaScript. JavaScript and Java, the only thing they share is the word Java, but they are completely different languages, completely different things. Okay, so what is JavaScript? So with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you've got sort of like this trifecta. HTML, which you can see on my page here, it's these tags and everything. That's this sort of markup. That's HTML, and it's basically the structure of your page. It's how your page is going to be structured out. Then you got your CSS, which is the content over here, and it's your styling that changes sort of how everything looks. And then lastly, you got your JavaScript, which it changes the interactivity of a program. So people often use like a body as like a personification of this. So it'll be like HTML is like your sort of skeleton, and then CSS is how the person would look, and then JavaScript is the functionality, like you can move your arms around and all of that. Okay, so let's start looking at some JavaScript, yeah, and then just go over some information that you'll probably be asked this in an interview and all of that. So I do want you to know this. So the first thing is it's a dynamically typed language. Okay. Now, what does dynamically typed mean? It means that when you create a variable, so let's just say we made a variable here, const my variable is equal to string. It means that right now this can be a string. So let's actually make it a let. Sorry. It can be a string, but then I can also just take my variable and I can turn it into a number like this. Okay. I'll just make it a little bit bigger. So that's what it means dynamically typed. It's not bound to a specific type. Like other languages, once you say that this is going to be, you'll do something like this. You'll say string my variable. And that string is the keyword to say what this variable type is going to be. Or often you'll see int, which stands for integer. You'll say int my variable. So then this will only ever be an integer. We wouldn't be able to then go and then assign a string like this at the bottom, or just have a string value. So that's what it means when it's dynamically typed, is that there isn't a specific type and the types can just change. It's also a high-level language. Your low-level languages are your languages that are getting closer to a language that a computer can understand, eventually getting down to basically binary. Sorry, just... Okay. Sorry, what's up? Okay, so, and because it's a high-level language, you don't have to sort of worry about things like memory management. That stuff gets handled all for you. So basically, it just becomes a lot easier to program in JavaScript compared to something like C++ or C#. Okay, so that's basically just the intro of JavaScript, and at this stage, sort of all I'd actually expect you to know. Are there any questions yet before I start going into any of the explanations?
No, all good.
Okay, right. So let's start looking at variables and what variables are. Remember, we did do sort of the basic programming video a while back, so you should sort of have a little bit of knowledge of what I'm going to be speaking about. But so variables are sort of containers, so that we can constantly go and access that variable and get the value out of it, and that lets us switch value. So, for example, we could have something like let's just say that let person's name is equal to John. And then we have a program where we use person's name. So let's just say we would output, so console log person's name. And then we could change person's name to another name. So let's just change it to Denise. And then we can console log person's name again. And so what's going to happen is that this variable, sorry, let's just go to the console here. Okay, so this variable is going to first have the name John. And then we log it out, which is over here. So we log it out here, line 5. Let me zoom this in a bit. So line 5 over here, we log it out. Then we get to line 7, we change the value of person's name. And then we log it out again and it becomes Denise. So it's like basically a container. I've heard people call it a shoebox. So we can put things in this container, and then we can even change the values so that we can do cool things with this. Okay, so now JavaScript used to have the var keyword for your variables. So it'll be var my variable is equal to 5. Okay, and then let's just console log this. Okay, so this is how you would normally declare a variable with the var keyword. But now JavaScript has since moved on. There is a problem with var in that it basically makes your variables completely global throughout your app. And we don't want that. So now there's been more control given to us with ES6. It's a new standard brought out for JavaScript. And now what we do is we don't ever use var anymore. Do not use this, ever. You're going to see it in older code, and you more experienced people that are really, really good at JavaScript and coding, they will know where you can use it. But in your case, you never want to use this. The ones that you're going to be using is broken down into either const and then let. Okay. So the way that these break down is const is for a constant, which means it should never, ever, ever change. It is always going to be that value. So generally, it depends on sort of how you want to write it, but a lot of people, they will actually go, if you have a constant that's never, ever going to change, they might actually want to use snake case like this, my constant variable. You don't often see that. But so basically, a const means that this value is never, ever going to change. This my constant variable is always going to be 10. So if you're going to assign something and it's always going to be the same thing, then you're going to use a const, right? So if I even try and say my constant variable is equal to 20, you're probably going to see, there we go, assignment to constant variable. It's a type error. So we can't actually put that value into this. So this is when you're going to have a variable that's always just going to be this one value. But then that's not always so useful. Like there are use cases for this. Like you're often going to be doing this, but you're also going to want your variable to be able to change. And that is now with the let keyword. And the let keyword, what that does is it lets us change our variable to whatever we want. So we've got now currently my dynamic variable, and I'll just change it to new value, and then I'll just console log this. Oops, that was the wrong one. Okay, so you can see here that I first made dynamic variable hello, and then I changed this value to new value. Okay, so these two, sorry, not var, these two keywords here are the ones that you should use. Please, like when we're doing our course here, we never ever want to see var. I'm sure that at some places they'll be fine if you use it, but in the mentoring sessions and all of that, you should only either be using const or let. Okay. If you've got any questions, just feel free to ask before I jump into the next subject. Okay. Okay, so I'll just mark this as variables. And then I'll put this file, I'll drop this file later on, just in case you want it as a reminder. Yes.
When should you actually use const and when should you actually use let? How do you know which
Great question. Excellent question, and I actually am glad that you asked that. When you are working with arrays, this might be a little bit high level at the moment. Okay, so if we haven't actually got into arrays yet. Basically, you're going to use const whenever you never want your memory to reference a different sort of array or object in memory. So let's just say that we actually had an array here, and it equals to... Actually, let's just make it an empty array, right? So we actually got an empty array. So we've made an empty array called const. Oh, sorry, let me actually give it a better name than this. New array. Okay. So we've got this new array over here. Now, when we actually want to work with this array, we want to be updating this array that's over here. So what you would normally do is you were you take a new array and you want to push it. So you push like this. Unfortunately, we haven't jumped into arrays yet, so I'll try and be brief about this. New item. So this is actually going to be pushing an item into this new array, but the const here is going to safeguard this new array. So a person couldn't just go like this and type new array and assign it to an actual new array like this. That's now going to go and throw an error. Let's see. That's going to throw an error because now you are trying to assign it to a whole new array instead of an existing one that we're pushing items into. So let me try and jump back to this one in a moment once I've actually covered arrays, because otherwise, like, I'm trying to cover content that hasn't been covered yet. But so you're going to be using const when you don't want things to be reassigned to that variable. Okay, but I will jump back to that. Okay, so let me just check what the next one was. Okay, basic one. We're just going to be looking at comments just very quickly. We did cover comments previously. You got single line comments, which is control / / I'm not sure which one that is. You press control / I guess, and it will comment out your code. I think that's the default keyboarding. And then the other one, which I think is correct, is control / A, and that toggles a block comment. So I can select multiple lines and I can comment them out. This is generally when you got the block level comments. This is great for documentation because now I can just go and add a new line in, add a new line, add a new line. Whereas single line comments a bit more harder to just very quickly document your stuff. I highly recommend you have these things keybound. You should be working with these things keybound. You can see how very quickly I'm sort of commenting stuff out like that instead of going and typing that. So you should have these things keybound and try and get used to using the bindings. Yeah. So let's just have a very quick look at data types in JavaScript. So take note that when I'm doing this, how the color changes in your IDE. I know most of you are using VS Code, but you should have this happen in all of them. So let's just go and start with numbers, right? So I'm going to say const number is equal to 10. Okay, so you can see that there's sort of like a light green. Let's make sure I've got no questions. Okay, so you can see that it's light green. So this is now a number. So this is the one data type is a number data type, which is straightforward. It's just a number. It's not an actual string. It's an actual number. Then the next is string type, which is a string. It's in quotation marks like this. So you can say hello. This is a string. Okay. Now with strings, you can also include your variables into it called using like a string template, or I think it's also called a string literal. Do not stand to be corrected on that. And it's really, really cool. And it allows you to sort of concatenate or combine strings with variables. So let's say we actually had something like a name. So we'd have name A is equal to John, and we'll have a name B is equal to Mary. Okay. Now, if we wanted to go and combine these two together, I'm actually going to take this out and combine these names. So I'm going to say const combined names. And I'm going to say name A plus, and I'm going to make a space, and I'm going to say name B. Okay. Actually, wait, let's actually say hello. Hello. Name A plus and name B. Okay, and then I'm just going to console log this, and then I'll just move my screen so that you can see it a bit better. Okay, so yeah, you can see we've now combined these names together with this sort of string like this. But this is quite hard to sort of understand exactly what is going on when you're trying to read it. You have to add all these things together, and it becomes a lot harder to read, especially when you've got more variables and all of that coming in, and it becomes quite a mess very quickly. So there is now people wanted an easier way to read code, because with programming, one of the most important parts is that anybody can read your code a year from now, including yourself. So the way to do that is with these template strings. So let's check that out. So combine names 2, and Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a backtick character, and that is the tilde character. It's next to the 1 on your keyboard, which has also got sort of like that this, I think it's called a tilde. So you see that this is not a single quotation mark. I hope that's clear enough there. Let me just go in really far. Okay, so you can see that this is the backtick. It's the shift tilde key that's next to your number 1. Okay, so it has to be a backtick. Often people, they only put the single quotation mark, and then it doesn't work, and they don't understand, and it's because they're not using the backtick. Okay, so how does that work, right? So we put the backticks in, and I'm going to write hello. Now, what you do is you sort of break out of normal text by putting a $sign and the curly brackets, and then the variable name that you want. Okay. Now I'm just going to say and then again we do the exact same thing. Right. Okay. So now let's just console log this one as well. Okay. So now we've got the exact same thing that's being console logged, and it's these exact same sentences. But now if you look at this one, and it's an opinionated thing. Remember, it's not something that's set in stone or anything. Like, you can argue that this is a lot easier to read than this sentence over here. Like, it's easier for your mind to process this. You know, a lot of times you don't want to sort of tax the human mind when it comes to trying to read code. If there's too many things that your mind has to try and figure out in the code, it's going to have a hard time trying to actually parse and understand everything that's actually taking place. So I just want to make sure that I haven't got any messages yet. Cool. Okay, so any questions regarding the template strings? No? Yes.
No, it's all good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so those are strings. Now we got Booleans, favorites. I love Booleans. They are sort of they're just so magical to me. All right. If you've ever wondered how do computers work, and it's just so basic, and I explain it to my daughter all the time, and I do the typical thing. What I go and do, I go to my light switch and I flip it on and off. And that is your basics of 0 is off and 1 is on. So 0 is there's no electricity, and 1 is electricity's flowing. Okay, and that's how your computer works. That's how it actually builds all of these messages. It's binary. It goes and it has electricity off, then it fires electricity on for 3 times. So let's just say 1 1 1. Then it fires, or then it doesn't have it on for like 4 times or whatever. And then you can turn the sequence of binary into letters A B C D E F G. And then you can start turning those into like hexadecimal code. And then eventually you've now got JavaScript that can write code and turns it into your binary like that. Okay. So binary is, apart from just basic electricity, we use it as flags for a whole bunch of things. So basically, like, if something is happening, we say it's true, and if it's not, it's false. So let's do that. So basically, sorry, I don't know if I explained it correctly, but basically it comes down to either 0 is off and 1 is on, or alternatively, 0 is false and 1 is true. Okay. So let's just say we would have something like my Boolean, and if I say it's false, and then I can say const my Boolean 2, just so that the names don't clash, and it's true. It's really just that simple. There are truthy and falsy sort of values in JavaScript where things can evaluate into false and evaluate into true, but that's not part of this discussion. We will be looking at it in the future, but for now, Boolean is false or it's true. You would tend to see people writing Booleans. They'll tend to add is in the front like this. So let's just say, like we had the light switch, right? So they would call their variable something like is electricity on. More like just is on, and then they can actually go and use that to trigger it either as true or off, because they're trying to make the language or their code as easy to read in English as possible. Okay, but so those are the Booleans, and they're basically flags as whether something is on or it's off. Okay, so next up we're going to be looking at arrays, and these, like I will argue, are probably the most powerful things in JavaScript. Just because of all the methods. Like with arrays, you just see people doing magic with them, with the methods that arrays provide in JavaScript. So let's have a look at what an array is. An array is simply a list of data which is separated with a comma in JavaScript. Okay, so let's just do something like a bunch of numbers. So 23. Okay, so this is an array. It's an array. It's just a list of data. I think in theory, an array is only supposed to have the same data type. So, for example, this couldn't actually be a string here, but I don't think it really matters in JavaScript. But I think strictly speaking, it's meant to be the same data type. I can't stand to be corrected there. But so an array is just a whole bunch of values in a list that are being separated with a comma. And you can have anything. You can have a string here. You could even have another array if you wanted to. Nothing's stopping you. You could do whatever you want. It's your program. You can also then have objects inside here. But so basically, the main takeaway here is an array is a list of items and it's separated with a comma. It's really just that simple. Okay. And then so now you're probably asking, like, how do we get these values? And it's actually very, very basic. Okay. These items here. I wish I had a better way to do this. So these items here, you've got programming starts counting at 0. Always. It always starts counting at 0. So you hear it's either like it's 0-based indexing is another way of saying starts counting at 0. And basically what that means is that, for example, these items here, you would access them using an index. So let's just separate them by drawing a line on top here, right? Okay. So for the computer to know which item is which, it uses an index. So it starts here at the beginning, and it starts this one with 0. So that one's 0. Then the next one is 1. Then there's 2, and then 3, and then 4. And this will just continue forever. But it's always like this in an array. It always starts at 0, and then it counts up. Okay. So it's actually very straightforward. And so if I actually wanted to use a number like I just showed you now, like I said, this one is 0, this one's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So how do we do that? And we use the square brackets next to the variable's name. So we go and we write array, because we've called it ARR. You'll often see people calling it that. And then we'll put our index in. Okay, so let's actually, I just want to make sure I write console log here so that we can see what we're writing, what we actually want here. And then let's say I wanted to get 20. I would count here from the beginning. 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. And so I'll put 3 in. Sorry. Save it. And there you can see we're actually getting 20. Sorry, this is going to keep formatting. Okay. So you can see that I used 3 and we got 20 because that is this index over here. If I want to put 0, I can then go and put 0 in and I'm going to get 23. Now, to loop through an array, we use we discussed for loops previously. So let's just have a very quick look at just looping through arrays, because there are a couple of ways that you can do it. So traditionally, this is the way that you'd always loop through something, which is just a for loop. And the first one is your variable where you're going to be starting, and this is your index. That's why it's called R. It's index. We're going to start at R with our index, and where we're going to loop until. We're going to loop until the end of our array. But how do we tell what is the end of the array? Well, luckily, array gives us methods and properties that we can use to access it. So you can see I've actually gone and typed. By the way, if this arrow is over here, just click this and it's going to drop down your info. So when I do array dot, I can see here's all these different methods that I can use. These cool little purple blocks here, these 3D cubes. And we want length, which I don't see. Sorry, these are actual methods where I think, oh wait, there is up there, sorry. Okay, so length, we want to go from 0 and we want to go all the way up to length. And then how often does R increase? Is R going to be 0.1 each time it increases? Is it going to be 2 each time it increases? It doesn't know how much R should increase each time. So here we're going to say R is equal to R plus 1. Alternatively, you could write R++. We're going to get that just now. So this is now going to loop. It's going to run as many times as there are items in here. So there's 5 items, array.length. Let's just have a look at what array.length is. So let's just console log array.length. Okay, so array.length is 5. I can see it here. I wrote down array.length so we can see where it is logging. And we can see that it's actually 5 because there's 5 elements inside here. Okay, so it will go and run 5 times. So we can now, what this loop is basically doing, really just all it's doing at the moment right now, is it's just taking R and it's just making R get bigger. So you can see it starts at 0. Then next time it runs, it goes to 1. The next time it runs, it goes to 2. Because, yeah, this is making R jump up 1 each time. Then it goes to 3, and then it goes to 4. Then when it gets to 4, the next number would make it 5, so it stops. And it's because we're counting in 0. Remember, we go up to 4. 5 items is actually up to 4 because we're starting at 0. So all this is actually doing is just making R get bigger each time. You can see it runs 5 times, and it just gets bigger. But that means we can actually use R. If R is increasing each time, we can then actually use R as the index to access the element in our array. So the first time it runs, it's going to be 0, and it's going to show us this one. The next time it runs, it's going to be 1, and it's going to show us this one. Then it runs, and it shows this one, and repeats. So let's save, and... Oh, sorry. Not even console logging yet. Okay, so I need to console log this. And now what's going to happen is... I've just made it so that it's going to show like the index and then the value that we want. So let me just take that out. Okay, so now I is going to be 0 when it first runs, and that gets us 23. Then it goes to 1, and that's going to get us 25, and then it runs to 2, and that's going to get 7. Okay, so that's a way to sort of loop through it and then get your values using the index. The other way that you can use, well, people tend to struggle reading code like this. This is an older way of writing for loops. People will say it's not really syntactic sugar, which means it doesn't look very good. Like personally, I've been coding since I was super young, so this to me is my preferred format. But I completely understand people don't like reading their code like this. It becomes harder to understand. So what we've got now is an easier way to write this for loop. And what you basically do is you write your array.forEach. Okay. Then inside here is going to be a callback. Don't worry about that for now. We are going to be going back to callbacks. And then basically what happens is that this function is going to run for each item. And the parameter that gets passed is actually your array item. So this is basically going to be doing the equivalent of if you went and said array R. This item here is the equivalent of array R. So if we console log item here, I'm going to just turn this off. And this one and that one. Okay. So yeah, you can see it's actually gone and logged our items like when we did array R. So we don't have to do that R thing. And this is an array method that I mentioned that like you get all these really cool array methods. It's got sort of like what I like to call magical hidden powers. Over here in its properties, the first item is always, as the parameters here, the first one is always going to be this actual array item. Then the next one is going to always be the index. Okay, so you can actually see there when I'm actually in here, it's actually showing us. First, you get the value, which can either be of a string or number type. And that's actually TypeScript. It's actually telling us what types are actually in this array. Then we've got the index. And then lastly, you can actually get the array in case you need to do anything with it. So I can actually still get the index each time this is actually running. Like, you know, over here, we've got the R, and we can look at the R and see where we are in the array by looking at the index. If you did it just like this, you might be freaking out. Oh, no, I don't know where we're going to get the index from now. I need the index to do something else. Don't fret. You can just comma, put the index in there, and then we'll just say at index, and then I'll just say value. Okay, so now we've actually got our index back with the secret sort of thing here. I'm not going to go into the methods right now, but there are other array methods. So let's just type in array, and I'm just going to mention the 3 very quickly, but it's going to be part of a different lesson just because they are so good. I want to spend more time on them. The 3 are array.map. Okay, array.map. What this does is it just maps the exact number of times as there are elements, and then you can do something with your code. So basically, it's going to run like this for loop, and each time it's going to return something. So this is, for example, let's just say you had this array here, and you wanted to go and add 5 to each one. Basically, all you could do is just go like this, return item plus 5. Okay, so that's going to loop through this entire array, and it's going to add 5 to each item. Now, the only thing that's important about this is that it returns a new array. It is not going to go and change your current array. So you get a map. You also get a filter, which what this will do, my favorite one, actually I think reduces. So what this does is that instead of always having the exact number of items, like a map is always going to have the exact number of items. If there's 5, it's going to return 5. Filter, on the other hand, if it's true, it's going to return it. If it's false, it's not going to return it. So what you could have done is something like if item is greater than 20, return true. Otherwise, it can return false. So what it's going to do then is it's only going to it will only basically have an array at the end that contains any item that is above 20. So that'll just be this one and this one that would get returned at the end. And then the last one is reduce. And don't fret about these now. We are going to, I promise you, I'm going to make sure that you know all of these really well. Reduce, what reduce does is there is like a total or a accumulator. And it's the very first value in your parameters or arguments. So let's just have a very quick look at that. And so basically each time what you can do is add to your total. So let's say we had a whole bunch of values like this. We could go and count each of them to get a total of, I don't know what it is, like 70 something, 73 or 4. You can go and combine all of those till that you eventually have just one value at the end of a reduce. These three methods together can be combined. So you can actually go array.reduce, .filter, and have a whole bunch of stuff in here, and .map, and then you can .filter until infinity. And eventually when we start doing lead coding, you're going to see people use this to like, they just do amazing things. It blows you away. Like when you see what people can do. Knowing these three here is vital to you being a good developer. Like you just have to know them. And we are going to be focusing a lot on them. But we've got a lot of content to cover, so not today. Next one, we're going to be looking at objects. Before I continue, any questions so far? Nothing. Okay. So let's have a look at objects. Okay. So an object, as you know, an array is a list. Okay. So array is a list of items, separated with a comma. An object is different. An object is basically a group of key pair values. Key value pairs. What if I'm saying that wrong? So I'm going to just create an object. I'm going to say my object. Okay, now with an array. Remember with an array, we used the square brackets like that. And then our items just go in as sort of numbers and strings or whatever. An object is different. An object, you use the curly brackets. And inside here now, you can start using key pair values. So basically, when I see key pair, you can have something like first name. And then we put John. Then you can have last name. John Albert. Okay. So now we've actually created like a person object. So actually, let's call it that. Call it person. Okay. So now we've actually got this person object. And now what's really cool about JavaScript objects, and I love it, it's just like goosebumps because it just makes things so cool, is that you can access it with a key reference, right? So you see this first name, yeah, this is a key to this person. So if I wanted to go and access this value Jim in person, what I would do is I would put person, and then once again we got square brackets just like an array, and we write in your first name. Sorry, it's gonna have to be like that. Let me just console log this. Okay, so I know this console log's actually adding on extra code here. So what I'm actually just going to do is I'm just going to actually do this instead so that there's less code. It doesn't look as confusing. I'm worried that console log gets confusing with all the brackets. Okay, so yeah, you can see what we've actually done is we've used this string to access this key here. So you can see that this value is corresponding with this. If I wanted to do last name, that's going to give me Halbert. Okay. So wow, this is amazing, is that later on, when you're getting really good with stuff, is that you could actually have like a list of keys, something like this. Keys is equal to, and let's just make it an array of keys. So first name, and then last name. Okay. Now, this example is not going to make any sense. It's just to sort of show you what you can potentially do with objects. Is that, yeah, where I actually went and used the string here, you can actually use a variable instead. So I could actually say something like this: keys 0. And keys 0 is first name. So that's now actually going to go and grab this first name and use that to access this key in this person object. What that eventually will allow you to do is to have basically your code in linear time. You can have code incredibly efficient where it would have been like exponential. It would have just taken much, much longer. But now you can basically, this is called like a hash table. Hash tables are a little bit more complicated than this, but for the purpose of JavaScript, this you could consider a hash table, and accessing data like this is incredibly quick. So just try and always keep that in mind. But we will be looking at more advanced use cases of this in the future. Okay, so we're running out of time, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to just try and speed things up a little bit. Okay, so those are objects. Then let's have a look at functions. Functions. Okay. So functions are what make the programming world go round. That and variables. So what does a function do? It's basically like a block of code that we've given a name. And then we can keep calling that name to execute that function, to run the code inside of that function. So let's say we had a function called say my name. Okay, and then the name is name, right? Then what we would do is we will say console log name. Okay. So let's just quickly break this down. We've given it the function keyword. So we're saying this is a function. Then we are writing our function name. So this is what we have to call to execute this. Then over here, what is in the brackets, we don't have to have brackets here. Actually, let's do this. Sorry, I don't want people that are a little bit further behind in JavaScript get like left behind if they're not catching anything. So this time we're not going to have any variables. We're just going to say console log hi Jim. Okay. So I've got this function now. Okay, and so where we left off, here is your function name, and then your curly brackets here is where your block of code starts. Okay, so your block of code is inside this. So I might, if we have problems and we're having a review, I might say, please check this block of code. If I say block of code, it means where this bracket starts and where this bracket ends, because it's the code that will go between that. Okay. So let's now call this function. And there's different ways of doing it. You can either call your function, you can say call your function. But in computer science, you're going to find people get quite pretentious with their naming, and they have to have like bizarre names, and it'll be like evoke this function. It's almost like microwave. So you'll probably hear quite a few terms like evoke a function, but all it basically means is to just write your function out and execute it or call it. Okay. So I'm gonna take this out, just this console log that's there, just so that our code is not logging too much and getting confusing. I know there's a lot of noise here, but it's just in case you want to look at something at a later stage. Sorry, that stuff is at the top here that I need to get rid of. Okay, so here is our function here, and we call it, and it runs the code inside there. But now what we can do is we can actually pass values into a function and then use them. It's no use that we just got it like this. This isn't dynamic. We can't have a function, say my name Jim, or say for Jim, and then we're going to have say my name for Pam and say my name for Michael and all of these different people. Imagine trying to sustain this. There's a new name that comes in, or you go to a new country and there's a million new names that you have to go and add. That's just not sustainable. So what we can start doing then instead is passing parameters. And what that is that in your function, you can have, you declare your parameters here. So these are the values that are coming in. And then when you call it, your function, those are your arguments to your function. So here is where you pass your name, Jim. Yeah. So it goes from here into your function, So this Jim becomes name, and then you can now use Jim wherever you want. Okay, so let's test this one. We're going to turn this one off and then just run this other one. So it needs to be same on name2. Okay, so I'm actually going to make same on name Jim, and then it's just going to be same on name. Okay, so now we pass in Jim and we run that function. But then tomorrow, maybe we wanted to go and we wanted to write Pam. So now we're still reusing the exact same code. You know, that's important that our code is like this. So, I mean, for example, let's just say we actually had an array of names here. So we just say names is equal to Pam, Jim, and then Michael Skern. Now what we can do, let's do our loop. So we say for let I is equal to 0, I is less than names of length. So we're starting at 0, we're going up to the end of names, and then R plus equal to 1. And then we actually run same our name, and then we want names R. So it's going to jump through each of these, and it's going to take that value and pass it into the function. So now we've got it actually automatically going and saying hello to every single person. You know, so that's why we want our variables and our parameters sort of going through. Okay. Right. So there's also arrow functions in JavaScript, and it is a bit more of a sort of an advanced topic, but I do want to actually just cover it here very quickly. Okay. So we're going to be doing an arrow function. I think it might also be called a fat arrow function. I think where it originally comes from. And so what this is, it's basically exactly the same as a normal function, except it's written in a way that is sort of easier to read. Okay, so how do we actually write that? So we're going to say my name. This time when we actually got arrow functions, we're actually assigning it to a variable. So you'll see that it does sort of look a little bit different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this say my name to an arrow version. Okay, so I'm just going to just call it arrow version. Yeah. So here is what it's ultimately going to look like. So this is now the arrow function version of this. So, you know, often when I first started out with JavaScript, man, I didn't know how to do the conversion. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm actually just going to show you how do you go and do the conversion. How do I at least do the conversion? So let's say we had the same my name. The first thing you're going to be doing is change this. You want to put the const in the beginning, okay? So you're going to put const so that this variable is being assigned to that const. Oh, not const. So this variable is being created. Okay, then you're going to go and you're going to add an equal sign. So you want const, then your function name is equal to, and then you go to parameters, and then after your parameters, you're going to add your arrow function, your arrow part, and there you go, it's done. Okay, so it's actually the exact same thing. There is a couple of differences, which is to do with this keyword, but yeah, that's not what we're going to be discussing today. Okay, so that's the arrow function. And just so you know, in the future, we are, for our next project, all of this is going to be in there. You're going to be having lots of fun, where we will be doing arrow functions and normal functions. And after that project, this stuff should all be set in stone. Okay, so we looked at types not so long ago before I went into the functions, because technically, like a function is actually a data type in JavaScript, for reasons we're not going to go into now. So now that we've got all the types, I want to look at the type of operator. And this is important so you can see what data types do you have. Like sometimes you want to know, is this thing actually a number? You know? So let's just go and say, is number is equal to 10. So now what if I wanted to check if this was a number? Because your program, you needed to check, is it a string or is it a number? So the way you do that is you would do the type of operator. So that's basically all you'd have to do, but I'm going to need to console log it. So you type of space and then your variable. It's weird syntax. Like other things don't really look like this. And so now if we console log it, sorry, it's because I've gone and created multiple different names here. Okay. So let's just take all of that out. Okay, so I've created this variable here, is number, and I put it to 10. Now, if I do type of is number, I can see that it's actually given me a number. If I now change this to a string, Now remember, this is not a string. Look how the color changed. First, it was green. Now that I've put the string around it, quotation marks, this is now a string. This is not the number 10. So I'm going to save it, and there you can see it's string. Okay. Some other things like an array aren't going to work here. There's something else you're going to have to do. So basically, this is confusing. Like, I didn't want to go into the function thing. Basically, everything in JavaScript comes down to being an object. It's a bit confusing, so it's not something I really want to discuss now. But so if you've got an array, there is something else you're going to have to do. And that is basically, you will use the array method of array.isArray, and then is number. And then that's going to tell you whether it's an array or not. So all your other types, you can usually go and just do type of, but array, you're going to have to do isArray. Okay, so... All right, so I'm just going to end off now with operators because we're going to be running out of time. So let's just have a quick look at operators here. So operators are like when you're doing your math sums here. So just constant math sum is equal to 10 plus 10. So this plus here is your operator. It's like basic math where you got an operand and then you got an operator. Now, there are your different mathematical operators, so minus, divide, times. You already know these ones. The ones that I do want to actually discuss here very quickly is the modular operator, and you will be using this a hell of a lot when you're starting off in JavaScript because of the applications people make like calculators and things like that. They test you using the modular operator. So let's just have a very quick look at what that is, right? So if I took 22, if I took 22 divided by 2, right? The answer is going to be 11. I don't feel like it's the best example here. Sorry, okay. If I take 22 divided by 20, okay, and I save it, it's just going to be 1. If it's a whole number. Sorry, like I know we are getting fractions here, but it's just think about whole numbers here. Okay. Modulo is the remainder of that whole number. So if we took 22 divided by 20, there's going to be 2 left over, right? Now that is what the modulo does. So let's just save it, and then you'll see there's 2. Okay. So that's really important. So if we just, for example, we had what is a good example here? Sorry, my mind's slipping me. I should have thought of a better example here. But I hope the point comes across. It's just that modulo is what's left over, not what's actually got divided by. It's what's left over after it got divided by. Okay. And then one that, just because I mentioned it earlier, is that you also get assignment operators. Okay. So when you've got, let's just say something like count is equal to, amount is equal to 10. Okay. Now, if I wanted to add 10 to a variable that I've got, so I'm just going to say let count is equal to 0, and I want to add amount to count. Okay. So then I would say count is equal to count plus amount. And what that's going to do is it's going to take this 0 and it's going to add that 10 onto that into count. So count, each time I do this, is going to add 10 onto it each time. But instead of doing this and writing all of this out, what you could instead do is just a plus equals 2. And so that is going to be the equivalent of this. Sorry, so this is now going to be the equivalent of this. It's just to make things shorter. And then there's one more that you can actually do, and you're going to see it in your for loops, is you get a plus plus. So if I did plus plus like this, if count was 0 when I did it, if I did plus plus, count becomes 1. Then I do plus plus again, count becomes 2. Plus plus, count becomes 3. And you can do the exact same thing with minus minus. Okay. And by the way, these you can also times. You can divide. Which would be the same as saying, for example, this divide is count divided by amount. Okay, so this is just, it's a much quicker way of writing your code. And it's also a little bit easier to read it once you actually get used to this. Okay, everyone. I'm gonna have to actually cut it here. Like I actually got so much more content that I want to cover. But unfortunately, we're just gonna be running out of time. So I think we're gonna have to like have 2 or 3 sessions. This one was sort of, I know, a bit of the boring one, so I do apologize. I know there are some boring things, but I do hope for even those that are a bit more experienced that there are sort of a few tidbits of information that you can take home with you, and that you learn something. After this, we're gonna be looking at the JavaScript interview questions, which is going to be the hoisting and the closure and all of that. Like I want that stuff to be solid, and then as well as these array methods are going to be incredibly important in the future. These ones. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up to all of you so that you can ask any questions that you may possibly have.
I've got a question. Coming back to filter and reduce. Filter is basically whenever you want only certain values taken out of the array. What was the reduce for again? That was for if you want to increase the size of the array.
No.
Is that how I'm understanding it?
No, so it's not. It's all actually in the name, reduce. You're going to reduce that entire array to one value. So just to give you a very quick example here, so let's just say const values is equal to okay, so we got our values here, right? So I'm just going to make a new array. So I'm going to say values dot reduce. So I know you can't see that. Okay, so now our first parameter is going to be total. That's our accumulator. What do they call it? They call it previous value. So let's just call it previous value. And then current value. Okay. So before I even start, I'm just going to go and console log current value. Okay, so now we can see here is our values coming through, right? Okay, I'm just going to get rid of that true that's at the bottom. So now, basically, the principle behind reduce is that each time we're going to be doing something, we're going to be running our code here in this code block. It's going to get added to previous value. And then each time it's going to get added to previous value. Each time. So we're reducing it down to one value. So in this case, for example, what we could do is we could reduce all of these so they all get plus together. So that right at the end, our previous value is all of these values added together. Okay. So how would we actually do that? The first thing that you got to do though in reduce is you do have to have an initial value because it doesn't know where to start. Okay. So the initial value is going to be 0. So this previous value is going to start at 0. And I'm just going to say previous value is equal to previous value plus current value. And then I just have to return previous value. Okay, so here is it now. This is it running. Okay, so the way that this works is that it starts. It gets into the first time that it loops, right? And it says previous value, which is 0 when it first runs, is equal to 0 plus its current value, which is also 0 actually. Okay, so then it goes to the next. And then it returns its previous value. So it actually was 0 and it returned it. Now it runs again. And it says previous value is equal to previous value, which was 0 plus 4. And then it returns it. So now the answer is 4. Then it comes back again. But now previous value is actually 4 this time. So it says 4 is equal to 4 plus 6. So now it becomes 10. Then it runs again. So each time it's actually adding these on and on till you've only actually got this one previous value right at the end. So you see it's reducing it down to one value. Yeah.
I have a question. I was trying to do this earlier today, actually, and I wasn't getting the same result as when I just did like a for each, and I just added to a variable that I had defined outside of that scope. But the thing was, it was a bit complicated. I had like an if statement. So for each current value, if it was between 0 and 25, then I had to return this amount to add to the previous value. But if it was between 50 and 100, I had to add a different value to previous value. And I wonder if that's possible inside here, because I wasn't getting it to work.
Yeah, you can do whatever logic you want inside you. It could have been that maybe you weren't returning it.
Yeah, I didn't do the 0 at the end. So
That can
maybe
also
that was
possibly
it.
be an issue. Yeah, if you don't have the 0, it can actually catch you out. So let's just try to take it out and see what happens. You see, in this case, it's fine. But for
Yeah.
example, if you wanted it to be an array, how do you push it to an array if it's not an array yet? Because remember, array's got a like a dot push method. So I've created just an empty array here, and I can dot push, right? But if you haven't turned it into an array yet, it's not going to know that it can push to an array, or it's actually just going to break because it's not an array yet. But this is more of the more advanced stuff there. But you should always, with your reduce, you should always go and give it an initial value. The reduce method is the hardest out of all of them. So any of you don't feel disheartened when you are working with reduce. These things are hard. They are not intuitive. They are not just basic and simple. Yes, there are people that come along and they know map and they know reduce and they know filter because they've learned it in another language. That's cheating, to just suddenly jump into another language. It's not like you just learned it from scratch. If you are picking these concepts up for the first time, it is not going to be something that you just, well, I understand that 100%. It's going to be something you're going to fight with. And you're going to have to do some lead coding exercises to really understand how to use it. It's just one of those things. But never ever shy away from a learning experience. If there's something you still need to learn, take it with a smile, because that's another opportunity for you to better yourself. So take it even from me that when I was learning these, I can tell you I struggled so bad that eventually what I did is I dedicated like 2 weeks and I just sat doing lead coding. If you don't know what lead coding is, it's these sort of like hacker rank. I'm going to eventually have all of you doing these at a later stage, and basically it's just a bunch of like difficult questions that you need to do, and usually you have to solve it with filter, map, and reduce, but combining them to ultimately get a result that you need. Otherwise, you'd have to have like 1,000 lines of code, where you could have actually brought it all down to just maybe 50 lines of code by using map and filter and reduce all together. Yeah. And just to quickly just add on to that, I know we're running over time here. Just to give an example, when I say combining them, like you might not understand what I'm trying to say here. Just imagine, right, we had these values here. Okay. Now, when I said to you that we can filter, we could go and filter. So we would filter out any age above 40. Then we could reduce. And what we could then do is get any name who is John, basically. Probably, it's not bad. I've been doing really bad today with my examples. But so you could combine these things all together, that you'd eventually have 4 or 5 of them chained. That's ridiculous. You usually only like chain at most 2 or 3. But you chain these and you can just get these amazing results with your data, which would otherwise have been really complex things to actually try and code. So that was just a bit of a tangent there. Any other questions at this stage?
When is it better to always use for each loop because it's a lot shorter in coding, or is there a specific time when you should use the for loop?
The people generally want to always see for each. He's referring to this code. Yeah, let's try and get this out. He's referring to which ones should we actually be doing. You should, for employment purposes, always be using for each. They want to see that your code is a lot cleaner. With that being said, it's part of my duty to tell you that for each runs a hell of a lot slower than a normal for loop. But in most cases, I don't think it's going to impact your application, and it's most likely going to be better to be running just a for each. But I have to do, this is part of my responsibility to tell you that a for loop in its original form runs a lot faster. If you were to do speed tests, you can see that it runs like significantly faster. But I think that the amount of time that it takes, like the difference, that discrepancy, is not worth using a for loop. So like when it comes like you know, at the end of the day, all of you need to be getting employed and getting really good jobs. I want to see you each with that 100K per month, man. That like just rather try and write it like this, because your code ends up being neater. It's easier to digest.
Because at the same time, you can actually replace the for each with a dot map, and it basically does the same thing. Will a
No.
dot map work faster than that?
So map and for each are the same thing. What for each, the only difference between the two is that map is returning an item. So for each is running here, and nothing's actually happening. Like nothing returned basically. So it's like nothing's actually being returned here. You're looping through it and you're doing your code in here, and it stops there. Like this there's no point of that. Whereas a map is returning an array. So it's actually doing something. So when you actually, they are actually basically interchangeable, and I'm often interchanging them like that. When I say interchangeable, is that it's quick to change what you want to be doing. So yeah, your array is returned because you're using map. Whereas for each, it's just looping through it. It's got no other responsibility. It just needs to loop. Whereas map, it's going to loop and it's going to return. It's going to return your array at the end. This array here is actually getting returned. Well, the stuff that happens in your map is going to get returned as a new array. There was something that was actually meant to get discussed, but we ran out of time. And it will be in the next subject, but I'll just very quickly mention it here. We don't want to mutate data in JavaScript, or just in programming, I guess, in general. What that means is that, for example, if I had a function here, let me actually stick it at the end. So let's just say I had a function called do something, and I passed something in here. So let's just say do something, and then there was an array that gets passed in. Okay. You don't want, so there's an array here. You don't want to go and take this array and start deleting things directly on it. Because what's going to happen is that if you delete out of this array, this original array will actually be missing an item. So let's say that this was actually a variable from somewhere else, some other part of your application. So array from the void. It's not the best example, but let's go with it. If you were to go and manipulate this array that's coming in here, you are actually manipulating this array. And that is not good. Your application, what if another part of your application actually relied on this information, and you took out this 200, and that was maybe someone's password or Bitcoin address or whatever? That's problematic. So what we do in JavaScript is this is called mutation, by the way. We want to have pure functions. So what that would probably mean, and this is not the best example because it's gonna be a bit complex for you at this stage, is that you'd want to have a new array that gets defined. And what I'm doing here is actually, it's a spread operator. I'm just spreading out the array, and then I'm actually going to return a new array. So I know this isn't the greatest example. That's what I said from the beginning. But something that I want you to walk away just right before the end is that we don't want to be mutating data. We always want to actually, if it comes to arrays and objects, we want to go and clone it and then manipulate that and return it. And so the reason why I'm telling you all of this is that's why functions like map, functions like map return a new array. It doesn't mutate the array it's working with. It's going to return a new array. Okay. Right, everyone, I know you guys have all been kind and hanging on. So I'm going to let you all go. Thank you very much for attending this session. Can I get a little bit of feedback? Was there some stuff that you learned, or was it a little bit sort of the same old that you've already covered in the past?
For me, it was all new. I just started with JavaScript, but it was very informative. I'm definitely gonna try and do some exercises this week to try and understand everything. But it was really helpful, and I didn't know about the const and let versus the var.
Yeah, please, no var, people, no var at all. Don't. It's going to look really bad on your portfolio if people are opening it up. We're talking that's like 10 years ago. We need to be using ES6 techniques and everything, methods and tools. Anybody else got some feedback?
Yeah, tonight's session was definitely helpful, especially with the filter and reduce. So thanks a lot for that.
Right, and once again, we just want to say thank you to Code Capsules, which is sponsoring our sessions from here on. Definitely do check them out. We'll definitely be making use of them. They're gonna hate me for this, but it's the equivalent of like South Africa's Netlify, and the sites on there are blitzfast. So I'm really like looking forward to building projects out on their servers. Cool.
Look forward to it.
All right, everyone. Okay, so I'm gonna end it here. I'll upload the video in a moment, and then I'll catch you next week.
Thank you
Cool.
so
Yeah, thanks
much.
very much.